Hi, everybody. So my name is Karen Washington. I tell people I'm a farmer. I grow food. I feed people, body and mind. I've been growing food for over 30 something years. I'm growing now with a group of my friends. We have a farm, a 6-acre farm called Regenerative Farm up in Chester, New York. And so today's class will be talking about the history of regenerative agriculture and its impact on design, fashion, and city planning. It's important to examine the industrial agriculture and its part in both food and the textile industry. So we'll talk about soil, land, colonization, labor, wealth, and the industrial ag future. We begin by looking at agriculture's foundation first, which is going to be soil and soil health and soil fertility, which is vital to human health, environmental biodiversity, and ultimately life on Earth as we know it. When you think of agriculture, you normally think of food and not fashion. Yet some of the leading textile fabrics are plant-based, like cotton and hemp and bamboo, and of course dyes. It too is an industry that has impacted our environment, labor, and farming. As an activist, an advocate for food, social, and environmental justice, one must question an agricultural system that for years has been extractive and exploitative, realizing that the planet can no longer sustain itself this way. As a result, people are now uplifting the practices of indigenous people in terms of stewardship, healing, restoration, and now what is being called regenerative agriculture. So as an industry that has forgotten its roots, we begin with the foundation of agriculture, which is soil. And soil health is human health. Soil is not dirt, even though people have a tendency to interchange the two, because soil is alive. It's full of earthworms and microorganisms and fungi and bacteria and a lot of decaying stuff and crawling stuff. So also is a medium for transporting nutrients. It's where chemical exchange takes place in the form of photosynthesis. Soil is a foundation for the root system, and it's a holding place for molecules. Without soil, we would not be able to have the 4 F's: food, fiber, fuel, and feed. Soil is made up of 45% minerals, 25% air, 25% water, and 5% of organic matter. Soil is the foundation of our ecosystem, an ecosystem that consists of plants, animals, the environment. And believe it or not, it takes thousands and thousands of years to form soil. So let's get a little history about soil and its layers. Let me sort of, so you can see this down, minimize my screen a little. There we go. So if you look at these soil horizons, or sometimes called layers, you see what's really important is to really look at the O and A horizon layers, because this is where the action happens. So at the O horizon layer is where you normally see the decaying of insects and leaves, which is called humus, not hummus. Hummus is what we eat. Humus is that sort of organic layer, that top layer. The next layer where all the action happens is the topsoil layer. And in the topsoil layer, this is mainly contains the nutrients and minerals of organic matter that the plant will be able to use. Here is where seeds germinate, and here is where the root system will take up that organic matter. The B horizon layer is where leaching occurs. So any excess minerals or soil goes to this layer. The C horizon layer is mostly called the plant material layer. And this is where the formation of soil will happen eventually. And then you have the R horizon layer or the bedrock, where hardly any nutrients are there. And it mostly consists of granite, limestone, and sandstone. Now, we can't talk about soil without talking about soil texture. And so if you look at soil texture, soil is made up of sand, silt, and clay. So if you've ever had the experience of holding on to clay, you know that it's dense, they can hold moisture, however, very difficult for roots to penetrate. And you know, sand, if you've been on a beach and you hold sand, you know that water just goes right through. So in essence, minerals will go right through. And silt is comprised mostly of just small particles of rocks. And so what you want to have when you have good topsoil is a combination of the three: sand, silt, and clay. This will give you what is called loamy soil, soil that'll be advantageous for topsoil. Where most of the function that is happening within the plant world is at the topsoil. This is the miracle of photosynthesis, because what is happening is that the plants are drawing up water through their roots, and the leaves are opening up, taking in carbon dioxide from the air, using the sun as the energy source to change the combination of water and carbon dioxide into sugar and oxygen. The sugars are the formation of the food for the plant, and oxygen is released. So this is all happening within the plant realm. Good soil fertility depends on water, air, nutrients, micronutrients, and macronutrients. And some of the commonly known minerals that people know of are N, nitrogen, K, potassium, and P, phosphorus. And usually nitrogen gives the plant its leafy complexion, but also is where the energy is occurring. Phosphorus is where you get good fruit and flower production. And potassium is for stem and root development. However, what we're starting to see now is a lot of poor soil fertility. And this is a result of numerous things. For example, because of the use of so many chemicals, because of industrial agriculture, a lot of the chemicals are starting to leach out into our waterways. And so you see a lot of overuse of chemical fertilizers and leaching minerals such as nitrogen, phosphorus, iron, and with sunlight of producing and increase in temperature are producing what we are starting to see, algae bloom in a lot of our waterways and oceans. Another factor of poor soil fertility is carbon. You know, after the Industrial Revolution, humans were releasing so much carbon in the air because of cars, car emission, and factories. However, the real culprit now is not emissions from cars, but the amount of carbon that's now being fused into the air because we're cutting down the forests. When we talked about the slide before, we talked about plants holding on to that carbon for food. So what is happening, especially in the Amazon, as we tear down trees, the carbon, which would normally be stored within the plant, is now being released in the atmosphere, causing the planet to warm up. Another factor is erosion. And erosion is simply soil being washed away. Erosion can be caused by water, wind, ice, or gravity. And I wanted to show this slide in particular because back in the 1930s, we had what was called the Big Dust Bowl, in which millions and millions of topsoil was washed away, taken away from farmland. And once topsoil is taken away, it never comes back. And this was caused because a lot of farmers were depleting the soil of natural grasses and planting crops that were not conducive for the soil, especially in areas that were prone to drought, that were arid, and never had a chance to replenish the soil. Something to think about, because in the back of our minds, what is happening today with climate change, is this something that will happen again? Another area is overtilling. And many of you have heard the term no-till, because what farmers are starting to realize is that when you overtill and you're constantly lifting up the soil, what you're doing is disrupting the microorganisms that feed the health of the soil. And as a result, you're leading more to the plants that have diseases and pests. Another factor is monocropping. And I say that because back in the day, farmers would grow a diversity of plants and flowers. However, because of this industrial economy, now farmers are concentrated on a specific crop because of profit. So now you see farmers going away from biodiversity and more towards a single crop for profit, namely corn, soy, or wheat. The question we all must ask ourselves, could this happen again if we continue to overplant, harvest, and yet never replenish the soil? The answer? You have to answer that. The next, we're going to talk about land, because we can't talk about soil if we don't talk about land. The dispute over land covers centuries. We fought over land. Wealth was built over land. People were displaced over land. And when it comes to agriculture and the textile industry in the United States, the wealth of this country was built on the backs of enslaved, indigenous, and immigrant people. The food that you eat, the clothes that you wear, comes from free or cheap labor. But you know, folks, it didn't start right now. It started centuries ago. It started when the arrival of the new settlers came to this land. This land, which was once called Turtle Island from our indigenous people. Europeans were fighting over the control of North America because of its resources and its raw material, a resource that can be exploited by individuals or companies, setting the stage for European dominance and white supremacy of indigenous and enslaved people. During the Columbia Exchange, which chronicles Christopher Columbus' exploration, many things were happening as the transportation of goods and plants were happening between the old world, which was commonly known as Europe and Asia, the Americans, and West Africa. During the 15th century, this wasn't happening with the New World because of the fact that the New World did not come into existence until there were ships large enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean. At first, the relationship between explorers and early settlers and indigenous people was amicable. Trade was happening with resources, techniques, skills, but as explorers came to conquer, settlers came to take land, and indigenous people fought back. So from Columbus back in 1942 to Ponce de Leon in 1513 to Ferdinand de Soto, 1539, to the French and Indian War in 1754, to the 1830 Trail of Tears, which is the Indian Removal Act. We'll talk a little bit about that more. Because battles were fought, folks. Battles were fought over the rights of indigenous people. Europeans and colonists came to this land and looked at open spaces, unmarked territory, ignoring the fact that indigenous people were living here thousands and thousands of years with their own culture and their own civilization, yet they were forced from their homeland. So I want people to sort of stop and think and question what happens when you displace a group of people from their homeland. Imagine you eradicate their history, their language, their culture, the names of landmarks, the names of mountains and animals and plants, and you take that culture, eradicate it, and make it your own. And then there's this justification of colonialism. The colonizers thought that they were the superior race and that anyone who was non-European descent were nothing but heathens. They never considered indigenous laws, their government, their cultures or belief to be legitimate. They believed they had the moral right and obligation to make decisions to affect everybody. Treaties were made and treaties were ignored. And I just want to go through and show you exactly the difference between how Europeans viewed land tenure and how indigenous people viewed land tenure. Usually, the Europeans believed in individual ownership, private property, deed proving ownership. Ownership is inherited, subject to taxes, and that owners have all rights. Whereas the indigenous view is more of communal control. Property is shared. Rights are inherited, but to be used in the communal sense. Improvements on the land are not owned because you can't own the land. And usually the rights are within the tribal's belief. In contrast, indigenous people value the group or the collective more than the individual. Each person has a role. Each contributes to the whole of the group. Extended families are welcome. They're large, including aunts and uncles and cousins. Indigenous people view women being equal to men. Women are supported, honored, and respected for their role of givers of life. And in the indigenous worldview, everything has a spirit and deserves to be respected. The natural world was not simply to control or conquer, but a part of one being, a life force. Next will be the impact of diseases. It was not only the loss of battle that desecrated the indigenous population, but it was diseases, germs that the colonists brought with them, namely smallpox and venereal diseases, things that were uncommon in North America. And the indigenous population had no immunity to these diseases, unlike the Europeans. It has been said that 90 to 95% of the indigenous population died once these diseases were introduced. And of course, there were the Christian missionaries who would scare indigenous people to leave their culture and traditional beliefs because they would say it was God's will that this disease happened, it would have them to believe more in Christianity. Next, for those who have seen this time and time again, this is the symbol of manifest destiny. It was a portrait by John Gass back in 1872, and the term was made by newspaper reporter John O'Sullivan. And what this meant was the expansion westward of the settlers, believing that it was divine intervention, God's right for them to come in and push the indigenous people off their land, starve them, take away their food source, and bring in, they quote, their supremacy, their knowledge, bringing forth the railroads, bringing forth telegraph. She has a telegraph in her hand, and this was supposed to be a symbol of progress. And yet, because of this expansion, nearly 90% of the native population was killed, close to 50 million people. And today, only 1.6% of native indigenous population are alive today, which is roughly 5 million people, mostly living on reservations. And while the colonists were eradicating millions of indigenous people, ships were now big enough to cross the Atlantic Ocean. This time, not only does the transatlantic trade system start with goods such as sugar, tobacco, and other textiles, but they brought a new cargo, and that cargo would be Africans. The first African trade started in 1526, but the first African cargo that landed in Jamestown, Virginia in 1619 were Africans. Initially, the slave labor did include white indentured white indentured servants and Native American people. However, as production started to increase for the need for tobacco, cotton, rice, Europeans realized they had an endless supply of people, namely Africans. And Africans had a natural immunity to yellow fever and malaria, of which indigenous people and Europeans did not have. Africans also didn't know the lay of the land, so they couldn't escape easily as indigenous people could. And indentured servants were bound by British law, and they could go back as needed. But then came the racialized of skin color that made it hard for Africans to escape, meaning that if you were Black, you were automatically a slave with no rights because now you were property and subhuman. Still, when it came to the history of indigenous and African botany, scientific nomenclature, genus of plants and species, this knowledge of our contribution of indigenous and enslaved African contribution to agriculture was either ignored or pretended to be discovered by Europeans. Even prior to Columbus explorations, Africa became the dominant continent when it came to the main source of the world's food supply. Yet history always portrays Africa as this dark continent, a continent of scarcity, needing the help of Europeans to survive. During the colonial era, it was common for many Europeans to look at our plants and call them weeds because they could not understand how important they were. Yet it would be seeds and certain crops that would change the world into an industrial powerhouse, namely tobacco, rice, and cotton. And so here we have the timeline of the Southern economy that was based on plantation crops that brought wealth to the colonists. You have the tobacco plantations happening in the 1600s. You have the rice and indigo plantations happening in the 1700s. And of course, you have King Cotton establishing in the 1800s. So I'm going to just sort of stop a little to tell you a little bit about my story and my relationship to my African-American heritage. As an African-American, I grew up not knowing the story of my people, intentionally erased were the intellectual wisdoms and knowledge of my ancestors as they fought to survive in an unfamiliar and unknown land. I can only imagine as they were leaving Africa to go on a journey, what their thought processes must have meant. Thinking within an instant, what is it that I could bring? What is it that I could bring to this unknown land, this unknown journey that would not be found or confiscated? It was seeds. Seeds that gave a new life as they traveled afar, a long journey from a home to an unfamiliar place, uncharted territory, unfamiliar from their native land. But as seeds do, always finding a place to survive, to live again. Histories from my ancestors, grandma, grandpa, would tell us that seeds were placed in areas hidden from the sun, in orifices of darkness. They were meticulously braided into our hair, a hair that was coarse and thick, a good hiding place. Hair that would protect one from the elements of heat, rain, and eventually snow. Yet it would be these seeds sown on this unfamiliar land that would grow food as sustenance and eventually feed a nation. But that road was hard and arduous. You see, seeds are the foundation of life. Our ancestors planted seeds not only to eat, but to celebrate life. There was drumming and singing and dancing. They used seeds for currency to show wealth or adornment to accentuate beauty. Once their arrival in this new world, seeds became a mixture of Afro, Euro, Indigenous cornucopia of different food ways of culture. Food made its way from the old world to the new world. And to think that African and Indigenous cultures are monolithic is to say that all Africans and Indigenous people are alike, when in fact, they come from different regions, tribes, their languages are different, so are their methods of growing and cooking food. Plants from seeds sown with different ethnicities hide hidden messages on what they will become on non-native soil. African contribution to the global food supply can be seen in such staples such as cereals and root crops and herbs and fruits and vegetables. Common crops such as millet, black-eyed peas, and watermelon and rice. Does anyone know what this crop is? Well, if you drink Coca-Cola, this is the cola nut. Coca-Cola is made of a derivative of the cola nut. And it too found its way to the New World. The cola nut was used as a disinfectant against stagnant water that was common on slave ships. Most Indigenous and African people were healers. In fact, African and Indigenous healers had knowledge that they helped the settlers and knowledge that they brought to the New World. Medicinal herbs such as tamarind and bitter melon and pepper and castor bean plants all helped enslaved people to survive, ward off illnesses, hunger, and to protect their culture. Yet, when Europeans saw many of these historical plants planted here in America, they thought they were weeds. They categorized many of our plants and medicinal herbs as food, slave food, as weeds. And yet it would be slaves and indigenous people coming together, and they would experiment and incorporate different surroundings of plants in their dietary, medicinal, and religious purposes. They would learn new techniques on how to plant. However, plantation owners would watch as the slaves would work. They would see their methods, look at their knowledge, their use of tools, their culinary skills, and they would take that knowledge and make it their own, because ownership of a slave was property, and slaves and indigenous people had no rights, had no claim to ownership. But yet, the next 4 crops that I'll show you will change a nation. The first crop will be tobacco. During the 19th century, this was a cash crop. Europeans demand so many New World crops, resulting in an increase in labor. Tobacco became the cash crop here in America, here in Virginia and Maryland, and as a result, meant the influx of more slaves from Africa. It was projected at that time 5 million slaves entered the New World, bringing billions and billions of revenue, none of which was given to Blacks. Even before the American Revolution, tobacco was the main cash crop, bringing in millions and millions of dollars a year. And by the end of the century, Britain was importing more than over 20 million pounds of tobacco. But as the New World economy continued to grow, they were always looking for the next cash crop. And those would be rice and indigo. So one of the pivotal seeds that enslaved Africans brought with them to define a nation was rice. It was the African women who were the farmers at that time and brought that knowledge to the New World. The colonial South was looking for a new cash crop, but couldn't understand how to use rice. Because it was grown in the climate that was conducive of Africa, it was the Africans that knew how to perfect and grow rice. They knew by using tools, pestle, mortar, and by winnowing, removing the chaff and debris from rice and making it whole, that the settlers all of a sudden realized that this would be a cash crop. Yet time and time again, we don't get credit, as majority of the food during this time, such as jambalaya, Hoppin' John, grits, and gumbo, is now a staple here in the United States. The next crop, cash crop, was indigo. Indigo is a non-edible plant that grew on a slave's plantation next to rice. But again, the Europeans didn't know how to use indigo, but it was the Africans that were able to cultivate it and use it. And while rice remained the South-dominant cash crop, indigo became its third venture. The dye from indigo was used to establish wealth, and at one point, the profits from indigo outpaced sugar and cotton combined. And the most prolific crop would be cotton. Cotton would change the industry, from ag to textile. It will be cotton that will become king. And more importantly, it was cotton that would increase the trading of slaves, not from Africa, but now from the northern part of America back into the slave movement in the South. Yet it was the North, believe it or not, that had the dominance of cotton in the textile industry. The South had the crops and the labor, but it was Britain and Europe that had the cash and demands. And the prominence of cotton finally reached its peak with the invention of this, the cotton gin. Because prior to the cotton gin, it took one person 10 hours to clean 1 pound of cotton. After the invention, it took 100 pounds of cotton to be cleaned in 1 day, which meant the need for more people, more pounds, and more money. And if you look at a bale of cotton, Americans' cotton production increased from over 150,000 bales of cotton to close to 4 million bales of cotton. If you look at this bale of cotton, a bale of cotton weighs between 400 and 500 pounds. Just think about it. By 1860, nearly 40% of British exports were for cotton textiles, of which 75% of that cotton came from American South production by slaves, in which slaves received zero wealth. And because cotton became a big, big boom, again, a second wave of slave trade happened, resulting in forced migration of slaves, of free men too, back to the South. Cotton was not only a Southern crop economy, but Northern states such as New York City and Boston, again, starting land grabs from Indigenous nations, forming 2 corporations, the American Land Company and the New York Land Company. New York City, along with Boston, owning the rights, the financial institutions, and it was the South that owned the slaves and the labor. Next, we'll talk about the Industrial Revolution and textile. During the Industrial Revolution period, both agriculture and textile were now moving from manual labor and becoming more mechanized and efficient. And so as a result, people start leaving the land from the South and coming into the North to come into factories and textile. Textile business was booming as European and British economy wanted more and more cotton. People left families, loved ones, to come into factories working sometimes 16 hours a day. Even children at that time were working in factories. And if you look at today's fashion industry, it led to a mass production of clothes that were either cheap or that the labor was exploited. So let's take a look at what today's fashion industry is starting to look like. Today, the fashion industry leads to the mass production of clothes that either end up in landfills or are not recycled. And once in a landfill, dyes are leached back into the soil contaminating soil and water, and having synthetic fibers such as plastic that never disintegrates. Even petroleum-based polyester never disintegrates over time. And plus, it uses an enormous amount of natural resources to produce. But now the fashion industry is starting to realize its impact on the environment and looking towards regenerative agriculture as a way to move this industry into a more sustainable one. So when we talk about regenerative agriculture, what do we mean? Well, we mean about the principles used in rebuilding, as we said from the onset, soil health and fertility. That this health impacts and improves the biodiversity of our planet. That it helps restore the health in our ecosystem of plants, animals, and people, all interrelating. One of the ways that the fashion industry is changing is that they're forming organizations. For example, the Global Organic Textile Standards, or GOTS, which means that the product has to have at least 95% certified organic fibers. They know that by sourcing natural fibers using regenerative principles, it can build soil fertility. It can enhance biodiversity. It can leverage the power of plants to keep carbon in the soil, and it can prevent leaching of nutrients back into our waterways. In 2020, you had the 9th annual Future Fabric Expo. The themes were restore, regenerate, diversify, and innovate. However, I want people to think that growing organically means nothing if we are still overusing our natural resources, such as water. We are still exploiting labor, and if our industry as a whole is not diverse. While the fashion industry is looking at sustainable materials and dyes, organically grown plant material, waste from fruit, wood, and other materials that is biodegradable, it's us. It's the consumers that will have an impact. So I say to you all out there, you have a choice. How are you going to use your dollars wisely to impact a system? Are you going to ask questions? You need to ask questions. Are you going to read labels? It's important to read labels, not only in terms of textile, but read labels when it comes to the food that we eat. What do we use with waste? Well, in the textile industry, we donate used clothing. In the food industry, we donate to food kitchens or food pantries, but also we compost to bring back those nutrients into the soil. And last but not least, I invite you all to be proactive instead of reactive. Don't wait for things to happen, to be actively involved now. I want to leave you and end with this. Throughout the world, we have become countries of excess, wanting more, demanding more from our resources, as we perceive our resources as limitless. Yet, as both the textile industry and the food industry continues to survive in an environment that is changing, the effects of climate change must be addressed. Will history repeat itself by the exploitation of people or by the extraction of resources from this land? Or will people realize that our resources are not limitless and that the future of our planet is at risk? Only time will tell. Thank you so much.
Rebecca Morales is asking if you know why Europeans never enslaved people from North Africa as opposed to West Africa.
You know, I can't really speak on that, but I would just assume that, you know, they took the course of least resistance. You know, I think that, you know, if you had a place where you could get, you know, people without, you know, resistance, or you could bargain, I think that would be the most obvious answer. You know, you would not go into areas where there would be problematic. And I'm pretty sure that they went and really searched for places of least resistance where they could just easily get as many people as possible without, you know, harassment. So I guess I would definitely say that.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Lois is asking why cotton became such an attractive textile. What textile was cotton replacing in Europe with that import, and why did it become so attractive to everyone?
Yeah, well, I think it was, cotton before coming into the New World was prominent in Britain. As I said before, Britain was really looking at a lot of, first they were looking at tobacco first, and then after the Civil War, tobacco sort of went down. So we're looking at a new cash crop. And so Britain was trying to find ways to export cotton. And it wasn't until the invention of the cotton gin that happened that it really exploded. And of course, you know, they're going to find ways to make it easier to transport. I mean, going from the New World to the Old World was easy. They already had done that. And then also the fact that cotton in Europe was like king. I mean, people wanted to wear cotton clothes. I mean, that was like royalty. And so, like I said, it was the North that had the finances, the South that had the crop and labor, and it was Britain who had the money and the desire for people to buy cotton. And I'm glad that I sort of went through the history, because I think when we talk about agriculture, I wanted to put people's faces in a discussion when we talk about agriculture, because when we talk about history, we never talk about what happened with indigenous people moving off their land, or what happened to enslaved people and not having any access to the wealth of this country. This wealth was built on the backs of enslaved and indigenous people. And yet these are the populations that are suffering the most when it comes to wealth and inequality. And so I wanted to sort of make that statement. And then I also wanted to make the station of the racial impact that, again, the economy was built on. So I felt that it was necessary to not talk about how to put a seed in the ground and how to grow food sustainably, even though that was part of the conversation. But I really wanted to make people understand the history of people being displaced. And then also I want people to stop and think. Imagine, which I said in the first beginning, imagine the names of mountains and landmarks that were once named by indigenous people. They had names before we came, you know, and before Europeans came to this land. And all of a sudden that culture, that history was totally erased. And so the interpretation, so now for me, when I look at a mountain or a landmark, it's like, that wasn't the original name, right? You know? And so it's crazy to think about that. So that's why just going through research and getting people to stop and pause when they look at mountains and they look at trees and know that there's a history and a culture behind that, and that Europeans came and they co-opted and made it their own. So
Absolutely, absolutely. Tori Immel from Farmer's Footprint asked, Karen, I'd love to hear more about your thoughts on the role of storytelling and community in the way forward in spreading awareness of a regenerative worldview.
absolutely excellent. You know, when I speak to young people, there's so much wealth of knowledge with our elders, which are slowly but surely starting to leave us. And I tell young people, you got a Samsung Galaxy, you got an iPhone, you go to grandma, grandpa, abuela, and sit down and capture those stories, because they didn't go to the grocery store and get food. No, they went on the farm. They sat around and told stories of generations, history to be told. And if we don't capture those stories, I guarantee 20 years from now, people will tell you that your family never grew food on land, you never had land. And so this is so important. You know what, I used to be a physical therapist. That was my life, alter life, but I love doing it.
Right.
And I would sit with the elders, my patients, and I would tell them that I'm a farmer, and they would say, "Oh, Miss Washington, how could you farm? That's hard work." But then when I would talk about food, we would sit down and I would be mesmerized as they would tell me stories about growing up on a farm and some of the practices that they use and how it was spiritual for them. And I was just amazed, because I did not get that from school. I didn't get that from a textbook. I got that from sitting around elders and listening to their stories. And that impacted me to start searching out, to find out, what am I all about? Where's my history as an African American? Because growing up, folks, the only history I knew was that we came here as slaves. That was it.
Yeah. So a few people are asking, actually, we have some homeowners and landowners here that are wanting to support and connect with Indigenous and Black farmers and planters. So they're asking how they should go about finding sort of Indigenous groups or Black farmers and connecting with growers so that they can support them.
So we have a group here called the Northeast Farmers of Color. It's called NEFA, Northeast Farmers of Color .org. Look them up. Also, Northeast Farmers of Color. You're right. Also, my farm itself, if they happen to be in New York, wherever, we have community days the last Saturday of the month from 10 to 1 o'clock. My farm is Rising Root Farm. We have community days where we have people come up and talk about the history of the land, which is located on the land of Lenape people, and to get people to have one with the land and understand why, as farmers on Rising Root, why we grow our food, the attention, the spirituality that we bring in growing our food and having those hard conversations. It's very, very hard now. I'm in New York City, I'm in New York State, and we're fighting a huge battle because out of 57,000 farmers in New York State, only 139 are Black.
Wow.
And so, I ask people to look at the census, how many people are Black, how many people are Native American, how many people are Latinx, and find how dismal those numbers are. Again, when we look at agriculture and we look at the industry, the textile industry and both the agricultural industry are dominated by whites. And yet the labor that's being produced globally, both farming and in textile, are by people of color, folks. What? That's got to change. There needs a power dynamic shift that we're trying to do, a power dynamic shift in a way that changes the capitalistic way of thinking that has been exploitative and extractive, and changing the way whereby the people who have been marginalized for so long now have control of what they eat, where they live, the clothes that they wear. And so we're starting this movement, this movement of food justice and food sovereignty. It also needs to be textile justice and textile sovereignty, as well. And so we're going to get there, folks. We're going to get there come hell or high water. We are going to get there. I like the sign language of hell and high water. That's fabulous. And so I did give Slow Factory Foundation a bibliography. Yeah. I gave them an outline and a bibliography of some of the resources that I guess they can share them with you. Mm-hmm. So let me tell you something. This has been hard to do. I've been like 4 months doing a lot of research behind this project, and was nervous because I never spoke to fashion people. I'm not a fashionista, so it's like, I don't know anything about fashion. Give me a t-shirt and a pair of jeans and farming and I'm okay. So, but this has been an experience, again, a learning experience. This is why I love to do these webinars and these speaking engagements, because it gives me a chance to go outside my comfort zone and to learn so much, and then to pass it on to people that need it the most. And so I'm always in a learning mode. I'm 67 years of age, folks, 67 years of age.
No way.
Yes, yeah, I am. But as a matter of fact, I'm doing something next week called Landfall. Landfall is a documentary movie on the impact of Puerto Rico during and after Hurricane Maria. So you can look at that. And then also support my farm, which is Rise and Root Farm. We have a plant sale. We need all the help we can get. So pass the word. And this has been, I know I'm running out of time because as I see it's 101. This has been an excellent experience. Y'all can hit me up. I got Facebook, Karen Young Washington. I got Instagram. I'm not on Instagram that much, but I got Instagram. I got LinkedIn. I got, what else am I missing? Oh, Twitter, all those things. And feel free. I'm very humble. I try to answer, people's questions. Thank you so much for having me. My farm is Rising Farm. Y'all are the best.
Thank you so much, Karen. Everyone is saying you look amazing, you look stunning, and that you are very fashionable. So even a t-shirt and jeans, that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. We'll be sharing the resources with everyone following the class, including all of the contact information so that you can keep in touch with Karen, as well as Rise and Root Farm, and watch the documentary movie that will be coming out about the impacts of the hurricane on Puerto Rico. I just want to take a moment to express my gratitude to everyone who joined us today and was so engaged with all of the new learnings. And thank you so much, Veronica. As always, you're incredible, and people were showing you so much love today in the chat. So I wanted to relay that to you. And have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, wherever you are, and hope to see you all next week.
Bye everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.